So I have 2:05 on my clock, so we will get started. Again, for all of those who are joining us for the first time, thank you so much for joining. And for anyone who has been with us for multiple of these, we really appreciate it. This is our fourth conversation around the impact of COVID-19 on the fitness and nutrition landscape in the US. We are going to talk to you for about an hour. I think the presentation itself is probably closer to 40 to 45 minutes. And then we would love to take any questions you have. Just so you know, you are on mute, hopefully. You should have come in on mute. Even though you are on mute, we definitely want questions. As I mentioned, either use the Q&A function or the chat function. We'll try to answer them throughout the conversation as they come up. But if we don't get to it in the course of the presentation, we will definitely get to it by the end. We are recording this. It will be available. The recording will be available after the webinar. So we can certainly send that link out to you, or you can go on our website to grab it. We can flip to the next page. All right, so there are three of us on the line today from Murphy Research. I am Maggie Bright. I'm an SVP and General Manager here at Murphy Research. And I am joined by my colleagues Sarah Marion and Stacy McCoy. Sarah Marion runs our syndicated research practice, and Stacy McCoy is one of our research directors. Both of them have been digging through this data a lot, not only since March, but even prior to that, and are very familiar with the landscape. And I think they both have a little bit of a personal passion for understanding, you know, how consumer sentiments and behaviors are changing during this current environment. So they're going to do most of the talking today. I just get to come along for the ride. If we could jump to the next slide, please. All right, so just to tell you a little bit about the methodology behind this, as I mentioned, we do have a syndicated practice that Sarah runs. One of the great products in that practice is the State of Our Health Survey. We have been running it since 2018. We started in July. We do a continuous tracking approach with 1,000 completes per month. So if you're doing the math on that, we are over 22,000, almost to 23,000 completes right now. And this is the data set that we're using in this presentation. The State of Our Health Survey is a 25-minute survey fielded in the US only. It's rep to census, and it's fielded rep to census, and it's age 13 plus. As far as we know, it is the most robust nutrition and fitness tracker out there. And what makes it really interesting, and what's been great about having it in this time, is that it is continuously tracking. So we have a really good sense for what happened pre-COVID, what happened right at the moment things started shifting in terms of our lifestyles, and we're able to continuously track that on a week by week. I mean, technically we could do it day by day, but no one wants to see that much fluctuation in data. But on a week by week basis, we can look at what's changing as it relates to fitness and nutrition. So that's the bigger syndicated piece. For this deep dive, we've really focused in on January to May 2020 data. So you'll see throughout this report those key time periods. The May data is not complete yet, obviously, because May is not complete yet, but we have a pretty robust sample size there. We're over 500 completes already that would be included in this deck. So we felt comfortable sharing that data. What you will see, though, is when you do start to look at some of this data on a week-to-week basis, it does bounce around a little bit. And, you know, some of that's just a function of data collection, but a lot of it is, there really is a lot of I don't want to say confusion, but just sort of people adjusting, and they're doing it in different timeframes in different ways. So we're seeing a lot of variation in the data as we look at it. The one thing we are noticing, and I think you'll see this throughout the deck, is that where March was extremely turbulent, we're starting to see things sort of level off in April, and particularly in May. And some of the behaviors and attitudes are even returning to that pre-COVID timeframe. So this seems to be sort of a timeframe of stabilization. And we'll see what happens now that most states have some portion of reopening going on, but there's always the anticipation that we will have to sort of pull back again. So we'll kind of start, you know, the next phase of our webinar conversations will probably be focused on, you know, what happens during the next sort of pullback period, and does it look the same way that it did in March of 2020? So that is still to come. All right. I think, so a few things to notice. We often call out the generations, and just wanted to restate on this slide how we define them. So Gen Z, our youngest, are born between 1997 and 2006. Millennials are 1981 to 1996. Gen X would be 1965 to 1980, and boomers are 1946 to 64. Those are the pretty standard definitions that people have normalized around these days, so they shouldn't be any different than what you're used to seeing. And one other note in terms of subgroup definitions, we have, there's a very robust screener attached to this. The screener itself is a wealth of information, but for the purposes of this study, we've really focused on what we call fitness engaged and nutrition engaged consumers. It is a fairly low bar, but it essentially means that if you're in the fitness engaged category, you're doing any of the following weekly or more often. That's exercising, wearing a fitness tracker, using a smartphone app, or tracking your physical activity through any method. And then if you're nutrition engaged, you're also doing at least one of these activities: keeping a log of your food intake, taking vitamins, minerals, or supplements, using a smartphone app to track your diet, you're talking to friends, families, doctors about diet, you're following a specific diet, or you're reading some type of health food or healthy lifestyle content. The net incidence of all of this usually tends to be around 65%. So it's still, you know, the majority of the population, but they do have to have some sort of engagement with fitness and nutrition. Right. I think I will be turning it over to Stacy now. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to chime in.
All right, so I will take it from here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the general attitudinal and behavioral changes that we're seeing, at a total population level, but also within generation. And then I'm going to kick it over to Sarah, and she'll talk more specifically about some of the nutrition and fitness trends that are happening. So this one should be pretty obvious, I'm sure, to most, but there's still a very high level of concern, and COVID-19 has definitely changed most of our lives. If you can see, these numbers have been, if you were with us last month, these numbers have been incredibly stable. About 3/4 of people are very concerned about what is going on in the US with COVID-19. And, you know, it's changed the way that we're working. Quite a few people are working from home when they didn't before. They've either lost income, or they've lost their job, or they're trying to deal with things like school closures. So people are still kind of in these alternate states than what they're used to, and these are also numbers that have been pretty stable over the last couple of months. When we look at this by generation, what you see is that millennials and Gen X are the most affected. That probably won't surprise many people, but part of this is because they're the ones who are being impacted the most, certainly by childcare. So about 1/4 of both millennials and Gen X are having to deal with, you know, managing childcare and schooling on their own. They're also more likely to have been laid off, or certainly to have lost some wages, and a big one, be working from home instead. So millennials and Gen X are definitely the one that are feeling this the most, while Gen Z and boomers are a bit more likely to say that, you know, they haven't really been impacted to the same degree.
We did get a question right away about whether there was a difference in concern between our nutrition and fitness engaged folks, and the answer is no. It varies a little bit by generation, but not very much. Everyone is pretty consistent in being either very or extremely concerned.
Yes, there's not many people that fall into the bottom two bucket for sure, in terms of concern. And yet, one of the things that we're seeing, we've talked a lot about this, is there continues to be this pretty high level of optimism around life and finances. We're starting to see numbers, as you'll see, trend down a little bit, but overall much more stable and higher than we would expect. We can go to the next slide. If you see optimistic about my life, people are feeling really good in April, in the beginning of April. That's starting to come down a little bit and normalize a bit. But there's still a very high level of confidence about financial future. That's right where we were the start of 2020, and never seeming to have enough money to cover basic expenses has been trending down. And continues to trend down even throughout this. And we've talked a lot about why this is and what could be happening. You know, initially we thought, well, maybe who are fitness engaged and nutrition engaged people are, maybe they've shifted. Maybe these aren't the people that are, maybe we've lost some lower income folks. We looked at income, it's been incredibly stable the entire time, and it matches pretty well with the US. So that doesn't really seem to be a factor here. Also, we have seen a fair amount of people in our data set that have lost a job, and yet we still don't really necessarily see that translating in some of these numbers. And what we really have come up with is that we just really think that people are viewing this time period as temporary. You know, they're still very much optimistic about their long-term goals, their long-term future. They kind of view this as something that's, you know, going to resolve, and we're all going to go back to normal and it'll be okay. So people are, by and large, pretty optimistic, a lot more than we kind of initially thought that we would see.
There was also the extra kind of financial bump. Many people received the stimulus checks that went out in April, and that probably has tided people over. I've started to see in the news headlines around surveys that people are losing some of that optimism for their financial future. But we're not seeing that yet in our data, and especially relative to some of the other things that we're asking about.
And other anecdotal evidence, you know, with some of the groups that have been impacted the most by unemployment are in the service industry. Some of them are actually, you know, getting by fine on the unemployment benefits if they were able to receive them. So I think that people are right now in a wait and see mode of, okay, well, let's just see what happens at the end of May. Let's just see what happens at the end of June, but kind of holding tight at the moment.
Yeah.
I think too, we were coming out of this time of just unprecedented economic expansion too. So it may be that there's still a little bit of a lag there in terms of, you know, all of it sort of catching up to your finances. So it will be interesting to see as, you know, we come fully out of the economic expansion and really start to see the recession piece take hold, how consumers will continue to behave.
Yeah. And we've also mentioned it before, many people are saving a lot of money right now. So if you haven't lost a job, you're not eating out as much, you're probably not traveling as much, you're not driving a car as much, and obviously that varies a lot by who you are and what your circumstances are, but that might be helping to buffer some of the impact also.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Oh, I think
Did I skip one? Sorry.
Yes, yeah. This just kind of continues kind of what we've been talking about. We're also not seeing some of those barriers to health, lack of money, availability of resources. These are also pretty stable, if not trending down, like the lack of money. So again, we're not really seeing those metrics that sort of point to financial hardships shifting as much as we would have thought, given the unprecedented unemployment rates. And that, again, we think it's just people don't seem to be as concerned yet. We'll see what happens in the future. In terms of confidence in financial future, we broke this down by generation. This is where you can see things start to slip a little bit. I think the biggest downward trend here is with boomers. I think that makes a lot of sense because they're the ones who, you know, the stock market, changes in the stock market are affecting much more immediately in terms of their retirement funds. So I think they're a bit more concerned about their financial future long term, whereas millennials, for the most part, I think are pretty confident that they can bounce back. We also went through the 2008 recession. That was when we were graduating college and coming into the world, and I think there's this optimism because, you know, we've been there before, figured you can get through it again, looking long term. And Gen X has started to slip a little bit, but they're still overall pretty confident, kind of right where they are at the beginning of January. One of the most interesting things that I found is a way that that I'm just fascinated about. We've talked a lot about this one internally as well. Families have moved around when the lockdown started, and we talked about this in our very first webinar, and they've stayed that way. So household composition, this is one of the biggest changes that we've seen in terms of household composition. Living with spouses, this has trended way down for millennials. It just kind of keeps dropping. And we've looked at this a number of different ways. And I looked at married millennials specifically. And it does seem that there's about 10% of millennials that are married, that are still with their spouse, that have left their spouse and are living somewhere else. I think that's just because we'll see on the next slide when we get there, that I think where they're really going is they're going to live with their parents. And I think the issue with children and having to deal with childcare has had people look at support in a different way and switch things up to get more support. But you are not seeing the same shift among Gen X. Gen X is actually staying with their nuclear family. They're sticking it out together. It's really something that's happening with millennials.
I read it.
Oh, go ahead,
sorry,
Sarah.
Maggie.
No,
I was
you
going to
go
say, I read a New York Times article about boomers leaving their households to go live with their millennial children to help with childcare. So I think you see a little glimmer of that in the drop in boomers living with their spouses too.
Yes. Yeah.
I have started to see rumblings about divorce rates going up as well due to this. I don't have a number on that yet or feel comfortable sharing anything, but I do think that happened in China. We know that there was an increase of divorce as well as agoraphobia. And so I think it'll be interesting to see if those same trends play out here. And I think they will.
I am starting to see, so I did look at that today, and I am starting to see divorce rates go up. So in May, it did tick up. It's a few percentage points, but we'll keep looking at that. But that is also trending up. So there's a few things at play. I think why there is another dip down in May, and I think divorce and separation is one of them.
Millennials are also less likely to be actually married than older generations, and so that might make it a little bit easier to leave your partner if things are not going well.
All right. And this again just shows where some of those millennials are going are with their parents. So living with parents have gone up quite a bit among millennials, and it's also trended up a bit for Gen X. So looking for support, I think, probably partially because they're also more at risk, and so you might be helping them out with shopping and grocery shopping and limiting the risk for them. But also I think then getting the childcare help in return is a big one.
We've talked a lot about this in terms of what that does to household shopping behaviors too. And, does that shift around who's doing the grocery shopping if sort of who's living in your household has changed dramatically? So if, before you were with your nuclear family and maybe the mom was doing the shopping or things like that, what happens when, the spouses separate and you're with your parents? And, so I think could be some interesting things there too, in terms of who's buying what and who's making a lot of those decisions could look a little different than what we're traditionally used to seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for sure. And that's something that hopefully we'll get some data on and keep looking into, but it's something that I personally just find really fascinating. And so it's something that I'm watching really closely, and we'll see what happens. I don't really have the answers yet. And, kind of like what we talked about at the beginning is it really just seems like people are really starting to settle into their new reality. Some of the bumps and the ups and downs that we've seen have just started to level out and started to look more like the beginning of the year. And you'll start to see that at overall attitudinal levels first. So things like spending time with family, this has kind of had some increases, but it's leveling off a bit. Reducing stress and anxiety, this one pretty stable for the most part throughout this time period. And maintaining work-life balance, people are starting to not be so stressed about that. That's gone up and down a little bit, but I think it's going to start to continue to level off here as well. Again, looking at stress, doesn't seem like people are as stressed out as they were during the early parts of the lockdown. Stress reduction being important, that's starting to fade. Stress preventing people from enjoying their life, that's also starting to trend down. So I think people are just kind of settling in, they're getting comfortable with our new situation, our new reality, and they're just trying not to stress about it.
I've seen a little bit of an uptick in younger consumers. We didn't include this, but because it's not quite there yet. It's a trend that I want to watch, but they seem to be increasing their participation in various types of stress-reducing activities. So that includes meditation. It includes yoga specifically for mindfulness, and other kinds of mental health activities. So maybe this, if you have some extra time, that's how I think they've been dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's mental health awareness, or mental health awareness month this month as well in May, and so that they may be getting more messages about those kinds of activities and behaviors, and just that it's okay to not be okay, I think was the big campaign that HBO was doing around that too. So I do think that there's some messaging specifically focused on mental health this month, just due to the fact that it is this time of year.
We got a question that asks if so people are less stressed than they were before COVID. And I don't know if I go so far as to say that. I think that the stressors are different. I think that many people have found there's a little bit more space in their lives to acknowledge and address some of the things that stress them out. But then, we also have seen, this is, again, from things I've seen in the headlines, like the average time when emails go out has bumped up to 9 a.m. from 8 a.m. So people are sleeping a little bit later. So there's just been some switches that I think this lockdown lifestyle has enabled, that have moved things around a little bit. So the sources of stress are different.
And I think the things, with most of the country being in some form of lockdown for some extended period of time, I've seen a lot of people just really trying to make the most of that time, whether it's spending more time with their kids and their families, or trying to find ways, to keep things fun. Lots of Zoom happy hours, lots of video games, different things like that. And so I think in terms of stress preventing me from enjoying my life, there's just a lot of, I think, more focus on making the most of your situation, finding the silver linings, doing what you can with what you have.
I think that comes with a recalibration too, right? So you sort of, your expectations may be different now than they were 2 months ago. And so while, we saw all of this variation going on in March with the numbers, things were jumping all over the place while you tried to figure it out. It may feel a little bit like, okay, I've got to figure it out for now. But, it just means that relative to 2 months ago, you feel less stressed versus relative to 4 months ago, kind of a thing. I think, like Sarah said, it's just a different denominator now, essentially.
So not an exact answer to that question, but.
And I think also, just like anecdotally, I think, people are just starting to reopen. So I think people have had put a lot of things that might stress them out, like daycares or schools or being more around people more. They've been able to kind of pause a lot of those health stressors. So it should be interesting to see if this changes as we start to open up and people start to change their behaviors again and numbers start to go up and down again. I think, I don't know, this is another area that we'll keep watching for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's some variation here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah and Stacy, by generation in terms of, it's not huge swings or anything like that, but we do know that millennials and Gen Xers are just at, they're going through a lot of the life stages, having kids, being in, sort of the prime of their careers, those types of things where they're probably dealing with different things, and that's impacting their stress potentially more than it could be for boomers. So there's some variation by generation too.
Same questioner asked if are these higher or lower than last year, and we'd have to double check on that, but that's something that we can answer as a follow-up. We do have these metrics from last year too.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of managing health, we're seeing some of those metrics start to normalize as well. So managing my health feels like a chore. That started to really kind of tick up in March, and throughout March, it kind of felt like this difficult thing to manage. But now again, people are kind of settling into this new norm, trying to figure out, how to get get in control of your health and your body. I feel in control of my health. This is another one that had really started to trend it up, and now it's just starting to normalize. And again, I think people are just sort of settling in, balancing things out a bit. This is one that just another thing that I found has been really interesting to watch. It's not health and fitness necessarily related specifically, but we have seen this return to spirituality. And that's something that we're gonna keep watching. But Gen X had this really big bump in spirituality in March and April that started to go down in May. Again, we only have half of the month, so we'll see what happens the rest of the month. And this could also be that we had, Easter was right at the beginning of April. We were all stuck inside, and yet people with kids, maybe they use that as a a fun thing or a new thing. And so you might have seen some return to spirituality there because of Easter. But it is kind of interesting to see that boomers have sort of had a lift. And then Gen Z, they sort of took a dip in February, and they're also spirituality is playing a bigger role in their life as well. So this is just another fascinating little behavioral change that we're going to continue to watch.
For Gen Z, my hunch is that it's because they moved back in with their parents.
Yeah, most likely. And one of the things that we looked at in one of our earlier webinars is it seemed like people were trading off diet and exercise. They would focus on one, then they focus on the other in terms of helping them feel better about their new reality. And it seems like those two are now starting to kind of converge a little bit, and people are integrating both back into their life. This is just a chart to show that you see early in March, people were really favoring one or the other, bouncing back and forth. And now those two are very much starting to converge. And again, they're saying like, okay, I have to eat well and work out. I got to do both of these. I got to reintegrate both of these into my life. And this is just another area where, again, I think people are settling into that new normal. Cheat days are also going down. So I think people are not sort of seeing this phase as like a permanent vacation, and they're sort of understanding that things might not be changing much, anytime soon. So they're normalizing these behaviors as well.
This is one of the, I like to think about this metric because there's multiple ways you can think about making sure to have cheat days or cheat meals planned. One way you could look at this is every day is a cheat, so therefore I'm not planning it. And the other way to look at it is I need to lock it down and I'm not planning it.
And also, I think some people might have gained a little bit of weight initially with all the extra baking and, comfort foods. So we might also see some of that, like, okay, I can't live like this.
Yeah, we'll see later. There's been a little bit of a relaxation regarding diet. So that's what I think this is pointing to. Okay, so next we're going to look at some of the metrics we've been following in fitness, and then a few new things that we've seen come up since our last webinar. So in general, we've seen a lot of this should probably resonate with many people on the webinar's own experiences. We've seen a shift in fitness toward lower intensity, outdoor focused activities. And I suspect that's mostly because that's what's available right now. So here we
had a question just about the last slide.
Oh, sure.
That. So they just said, how do you measure whether people are focusing on diet versus fitness? In terms of that metric, there are some lists that are the same in terms of how we ask them for diet and how we ask them for fitness, in terms of reasons for improving their diet or reasons for working out. So we use those. We looked at both of those measures to see kind of where people were favoring one versus the other and how those two matched up, because they're the same question, just with a different focus. So that's what we looked at. That's where those questions came from. Sorry for interrupting.
So switching back to exercise. So this is people who said they did any type of exercise activity, and we have a very long list of activities in the past 30 days broken out by generation. And May is partial. And you can see that there's a nice little uptick happening in the COVID period, which I have outlined in a yellow box, especially among younger consumers, but really everybody has ticked up. Gen Z did their best to stay at home, or sorry, Gen X did in April, and even they have picked up now. So some of this could be, we typically see an increase in fitness and especially getting outside in the springtime and in Q2. So some of that, I think, is related to just kind of the springtime bump, but I also believe that consumers are getting their exercise no matter what. Now, the differences we've seen is what those exercises are. And so we've seen a big jump among younger consumers in particular for walking. Now, boomers are the green line, but for boomers, walking is always the most popular activity. It's essentially about the only exercise that many of them do. Whereas for younger consumers, they tend to prefer, they still walk a lot, it's still the most popular form of activity, but they also engage much more often in higher intensity activities like team sports, like running, like weightlifting. And so this increase in walking is more pronounced for them and unexpected. And so we see a shift, and we'll document this a little bit more in the next few slides, a shift for especially those younger consumers toward these lower intensity exercises. So this is the activities that people have done over the past week. And again, these are fitness engaged consumers. And you can see that there's been an increase in walking relative to other activities, especially in the past, in May. There's been a little bit of a decrease in weight training, which makes sense since a lot of people's gyms have been closed. So unless you have weights at home, that's a little bit more difficult for people to do. And we've also seen a little bit of an uptick in yoga, which is easily done online. And as we'll see in a moment, online fitness classes have continued to trend up. All right, so this compares the importance of, or not the importance, but people who do any kind of those like typical outside activities daily versus the same time period last year. And so I was interested in this because, as I mentioned, typically in the spring we do see a little uptick in fitness engagement, and so I wanted to see if that's what was driving those numbers. And in fact, it does seem to be more important to people to get outside now than it was in the past.
And then there's just one question on what were the other buckets of exercises, and usually they're pretty spread out a lot. It's a long list, and they're just kind of a few percentage points, a couple percentage points across them. I don't know if you want to give some examples.
Sure. So we have a lot of team sports. They go down to things like surfing and sailing. And so most of the things in the other category are at 0 and 1%. So they're very small. Some of the larger things that we put into other were cycling outside. So that's like 3-ish% usually. I want to say hiking. I'm going to back up just so I can see what we showed. Yeah, so cycling outside, hiking, and then baseball usually picks up at this time of year too. But again, those are all fairly small, like 2-3%. All right, so I mentioned being outside, and we also see this is more attitudinally the best part about working out is being outside, and we see a pretty big jump in this attitude compared to last year as well. Now this is percentage agree strongly, so this is the top box on that scale, but the same trend is true if you go down to top 2 box too. And typically this is a really stable attribute, as you can see from the gray line. It's always about 20%, but it's become much more important now as we're, I think, indoors in our own houses most of the time. Okay, so this is a measure that we've been tracking over the past few webinars, and it was last week's Workout Typical. So we asked fitness engaged consumers what kinds of activities they did during the past week, for each day of the past week, and if they worked out at all. And then we asked them if that was a typical week for them. And so the last time we did this webinar, we saw a big drop off in that number, which you would expect since many people's fitness activities and the locations where they get their workouts in, all of those things had been curtailed. And so we're beginning to see a little uplift there, back somewhere close to normal, as I think warm weather allows people to get outside, but also as we see some of these states and counties, cities opening things back up again. We also know that as humans, we're pretty good at figuring out a new normal pretty quickly. And so as this goes on, you would expect that what a typical week is going to shift, and people won't be comparing the last week to a week, say, in January. They'll be comparing it to a week a month ago, which was pretty much the same as this past week, right? Okay, so we still see online workouts trending up, but there are some signs here that fitness engaged consumers are ready to go back to the gym. So here's that measure participated in an online fitness class in the past 12 months, which we've seen a really big increase. It was already trending up. This has been in a long-term incline, but as one of the headlines I saw read, it's in a matter of years. It's a decades of progress within the space of a few months. And a lot of offline gyms are switching to online, trying to scramble to figure out how to keep their customers engaged and switch to these online formats. So we've continued to see that trending up, but there is a little downtick in May. And again, as Stacey mentioned, we only have half the month, so we'll see where that evens out as we move forward in time.
We did get another question about willingness to try new types of activities. Is maybe some of that switch because people are trying new things, or they just can't do their typical fitness activities in terms of why the last week doesn't look typical?
I actually did look at, we have attitudinal data around the number of people who like to try new things when they're exercising, and that has stayed very stable. So I suspect that while people are shifting, finding new ways to get exercise, that the shift is really a reaction to their conditions rather than like some kind of propensity to seek out the new. I'm not sure if that quite answers the question. Basically, I think it's because they can't do their typical fitness activities, but what will be interesting to watch is what sticks. And so that's particularly true of online fitness. So if you can get everything that you need online, are people going to go back to their gyms?
Especially since gyms are going to be among the last to reopen. So we'll see.
And we have another question about online. Are these online fitness classes live or pre-recorded? And unfortunately, we don't know that. I suspect it's a mixture of both.
I think that probably has changed too, right? In the beginning, it was harder to get live classes, and now I know, focus group of one, like I get really excited when I do see a live class. So there's probably, it would probably shift depending on which week we looked at it. We are thinking about doing some more diving into the online fitness area. So if there is interest in that, please reach out to us after.
Yeah. Here we see the percentage of workouts done in a gym. And you see that dropping off expectedly as COVID hits. So it hits kind of its low point in mid-April, and there it has stayed. But it hasn't dropped off any further. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised it's this high. It's so the other choices for this question are home, a gym, or outside. And we have seen outside and home they've picked up the slack here. But to me, the kind of stability of that number of percentage of workouts in a gym indicates that there is some percentage of people that are continuing to go to the gym. And I think that's going to tick up a little bit as gyms open. And then here we had seen gym memberships, the percentage of people with gym memberships drop off. And then that has started to go back up as well. And I suspect that that could be due to online fitness classes, some of which are might be through your gym. And so that might be worth continuing to pay your membership fee or whatever format the gym is so that you can access those classes. But it could also be a sign that people are really ready to go back as soon as that gym opens up again. All right, so switching over to nutrition, as we mentioned, we've seen a little bit of relaxation in people's dieting habits. And so dieting as in following a formal food plan has decreased since March in kind of a steady little downward trend, and outsourcing meals for eating in-home has increased, except for going out to restaurants, obviously. So these are the numbers for following a formal food plan. So that's any formal diet. And you see the orange bar is this year, this time frame. And typically, as with fitness, we tend to see following a diet start to pick up in the spring as people get ready for the summer and kind of shed those winter pounds. And what's happening right now is that the opposite is true. It continues to go down. We looked at this data by generation, and it seems like a lot of that decline might be coming from Gen X, who have fallen off their diet plans over the past few months. So to us,
Gen X, we've just given up.
Well, who can blame you, right?
It's too hard.
Oh, and in fact, that's on the next slide here. So here you can see that more Gen Z have picked up being a vegetarian, so they moved home and made their parents' lives hard by not eating meat anymore. But they and millennials continue to follow a formal food plan at pretty much the same rates as previously, whereas Gen X has given up a little bit, and that's ticked down.
I like that they've given up on both paleo and being a vegan. Like they've just lopped off the ends of the sort of extremes.
It's hard right now to be on a diet. You need that on top of everything else. So a little bit of relaxation there. This is meal sourcing. So this is the percentage of nutrition engaged people who source food at these places weekly or more often. And what you can see is that predictable decline in eating out at restaurants. That's on the left side. And then there's an increase that kind of corresponds neatly with that of ordering takeout or delivery. And so that's kind of continued to, it's held steady at 40. That 40 is a little bit higher than the previous 40, but not a lot. And then getting convenience meals from grocery, whether frozen meals or prepackaged fresh meals. We saw that bump up in March and then go down in April as people shifted their shopping habits. And then that has started to go back up as well. So we think there's kind of a little return to normal in terms of where people are sourcing their meals, and probably some fatigue with cooking. Okay, so we also saw some interesting trends when it comes to supplements. And so more consumers are looking to vitamins, minerals, and supplements, which we abbreviate as VMS, to support their immune systems specifically. So here you see that the numbers of folks that are consuming vitamins weekly or more often is pretty much the same as last year. So we haven't seen a big increase in people actually taking and buying vitamins. But what we do see is what they want from their supplements has changed. So you see the break in the line here is because we actually added the support your immune system attribute in April of last year. But you can see where it was all through last year. So holding pretty steady around 30%, including in January, and then a big uptick as COVID hit. So same numbers of people taking vitamins weekly, and that's what this is based to, but wanting different things from those vitamins, and specifically immune support. So here, this chart is a little bit complicated. So basically, we looked at the numbers of people who said that they took each of these types of vitamins in March, April, and May of last year and this year, and compared them. And so what you see is the change. And so the light orange bar, I'll look at multivitamins, which are there on the left here. The light orange bar means that there's a 5% decrease in 5 percentage point decrease in people taking multivitamins in March of 2020 versus 2019. And you see that pick up. So people have looked to multivitamins in April and then even more in May to support whatever their nutrition goals are. And as I said, I think some of that is immune support. There's also been a big increase, or fairly large, in terms of individual vitamins and minerals, and then probiotics. So those are the highlighted ones. And it seems that people are switching to those from vitamin packs, which are more popular among younger consumers. And then that's the biggest change in the negative direction. So what people are looking for from their vitamins is changing, and it looks like they're looking at those from those really popular types of vitamins, like kind of your basic multis, individuals, and then probiotics, which are widely associated with good gut health and better immunity. What's interesting to me is they're not looking to probiotic supplements, they're looking to probiotic foods and beverages. And this just tracks with kind of the general trend of preferring to get your nutrition from food. And so I haven't gone to look and see if the sales numbers of things like yogurt are up, but we do know there's a lot of sourdough starter out there, at least on the internet.
We have a question about zinc intake, if that's gone up. And Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't really get into the very specific vitamin types.
No, zinc would be included in the non-herbal supplements. So that's the third one from the left there, which has seen kind of a little bump, but not much. But yeah, we don't have individual supplements in there, sorry. So I would expect that it is. All right, consumers are balancing these new logistical needs that we've been tracking at the grocery store with some of their previous desires for unique and organic foods. So we're seeing a little bit more balancing of this as we move forward through the pandemic. So this is just the online ordering and delivery. We've been looking at this through every webinar because we've seen a big spike. More people are trying online ordering, more people are trying delivery as they try to keep grocery shopping a safer activity. And so that really went up in March, and we've actually seen it stay relatively stable since then. And so if you started it then, you probably continued it. This is cleanliness. So not surprisingly, the cleanliness of the store has become much more important since COVID. And previously, this was just a very stable, always around 75%. It's an important attribute. It's something people want out of their grocery store that's selling them the food they're going to eat, but it's just become more important now. This is the percentage of purchases that are organic. And so this has been tracking up throughout last year and up until March, where it reached its high point, I think, with that economic expansion. And then we started to see it softening a little bit. But in May, so far, we're only halfway through again, it's held pretty stable at about people saying that about a quarter of their purchases are organic. And so this will be interesting to continue to watch. This is, typically people kind of move away from organic in a recession when they're trying to stretch their dollars a little further, but organic is also really closely associated with better health. So as people are balancing those two needs, we're going to keep an eye on this moving forward. But to me, this says people are trying to still get the things that they wanted before the pandemic started, but with these new logistical requirements in place for online, for cleanliness, etc. So during the last webinar, we saw this high quality store brands, the need for that ticking up, which again, we associate with kind of recession shopping. And that's since kind of softened a little bit. And so again, I think that people are trying to balance needs here. So they still want to get some of that organic stuff. But again, a lot of those also come from store brands now, which is different than during the previous recession. Unique ingredients has continued to kind of hold steady at a little bit higher than it was in January. And so again, I think people are balancing their needs for these two things at the store. They want to keep things exciting, especially since you're eating at home a lot more, but they also need it to stretch their dollars a little further. They want it to taste good. So just balancing all of those needs out. And I believe that's the last slide. Yes, it is. So we're happy to take any questions. We have a little bit of time for discussion about anything that we talked about and more.
So to answer one of the earlier questions, we typed it in, but around stress as it related to the 2019 numbers. And the 2020 and 2019 numbers are pretty stable in terms of their levels. So we didn't see a big uptick in 2020. And I think some of the other things we're starting to really watch, and they've been mentioned throughout. We've talked a little bit about, okay, what's the role of spirituality moving forward? We're thinking a lot about, which of these behaviors or attitudes really stick as we move into the next phase versus which fall away. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that. And then we are still looking to see sort of the economic impact and how that starts to play out. I think Sarah, really articulated it well, saying, we're trying to understand the balance between the need for health, given how much of what we're dealing with right now is health related, versus the financial side of things and where consumers are going to start making those trade-offs. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about in terms of nutrition. With fitness, I think, the big question is how much of the online behaviors will stick. And, we know that the online workout environment, there was a lot of infrastructure already set up prior to all of this, but I also think that, a lot of it is accelerated because of the demand for online content. And so it'll be interesting to see what behaviors stick versus don't. And, we internally debate this all of the time. And I think, what remains to be seen is how much people really want the human connection in terms of workout versus, is a social network enough online to fulfill that need. So I think that will be one of the interesting things that we start to watch. We have a question about any insights on mental wellness and activities that people are engaging in to deal with stress. So we've actually done a lot of deep diving into sort of the mental aspects of this. And what we find, and I think this holds true at pretty much any time of the year, is that the younger generations are much more likely to prioritize mental health as part of holistic health compared to older generations. And I think there's probably a couple of drivers of that, and I'm not prepared to fully say what the answer is here, but I think part of it is life stage differences, right? If you're younger, you are probably balancing different things, and as you age, and then what we see is the shift as you age goes more to the physical aspect of your health, and it's just because you are aging. So I do also think, though, that there's probably some cultural factors at play too, where it is much more. There's less stigma around talking about mental health now than there might have been 50 to more years ago. So I think it's just sort of a matter of when you were born and the environment you grew up in. Some of the interesting things that we found is, Gen Z, millennials are much more likely to have grown up in a household that had some sort of mindfulness behaviors going on. And, so they are a little bit more engaged in some of the mindfulness activities, such as meditation, journaling, gratitude lists, and those types of things. But interestingly, the sort of other piece of that is that when we look at overall optimism, there isn't, some striking difference between optimism among those who are doing those behaviors versus those who aren't. So millennials and boomers have very similar levels of optimism when it comes to sort of their overall outlook on life. So we're going to continue to explore some of that, but at the moment it doesn't look like, there's a big difference. There is a big difference in focus, but not necessarily on happiness between the two, if that makes sense.
There's also, I think, it's interesting what different generations consider kind of mindfulness activities. And so that increase in spirituality that Stacey mentioned, I think for many older people, that's kind of like meditation, right? The act of going to church, of prayer, is what they use to center themselves mentally, whereas younger generations, who again tend to be less religious, focus more on other types of activities. We got another question that says, are there any differences in gym going by income group? And I will have to follow up on that. We can definitely cut by income, and that would be interesting. My suspicion is probably so, but moving through, I think probably in general, yeah, the higher income you are, probably the more likely you are to go to a gym, but we'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Right, I mean, now with some of the more expensive home options, right, with Peloton and things like that,
yeah,
to see what's happening online. While we wait to see if there's any more questions, of course, there's a lot of very real issues that we're all dealing with, but just on the research standpoint, we've talked all the time about it. This is such a fascinating time to be in research, to work in research. There's so many things that are happening that, you know, we didn't necessarily expect, or that are surprising, or, you know, we're just not sure what's going to happen next. So it's been really neat to watch, really interesting to watch, fascinating, like I said, and we're all sort of itching to see what happens as we continue.
It's been interesting to see, you know, in my social feeds, we're looking at a lot of charts these days. A lot of people are looking at charts. And so I think a lot of people have learned how to read data in a way that they perhaps didn't, not they didn't know how, but they didn't do it on a regular basis, whereas now we see those kinds of things in the news every day. And they've become much more important to our kind of your daily life. That's been an interesting change for me to watch as a lurker.
We are right at the end of our hour right now, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I know that you're probably bombarded with invitations to webinars about COVID-19 data, so thank you. We are probably going to, you know, we're definitely going to continue to communicate this information. Not sure what platform we'll use yet, but definitely stay tuned. And if you do have questions, please feel free to follow up with us. Sarah's contact information is on this screen, so you can email her, or feel free to reach out to Stacy and myself as well. We're always happy to chat about this. To be honest, the three of us would probably do this webinar, just the three of us, just so we can sit around and kind of talk about the data. So, you know, and if you have interest in the broader study, the State of Our Health study, we also love to talk about that too. And there's just such a wealth of data in there. There's a lot you can do with 23,000 completes. So we can probably answer pretty much any question. So thank you all. Please stay safe, be well, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Bye-bye.